Hi everyone and welcome to the 17th episode of our free online tarot course series brought to you by 1millionnights.com. In today's episode we are taking a look at the symbolism and interpretations behind the tarot card with the number 16, the Tower. Now this is another tarot card which really depends on the reader's personal experience with it, and of course the reader's own spiritual philosophies, because this time what it symbolizes, that is very clear, that is not as susceptible to interpretation, but its effects and the greater meaning behind why a tower moment is taking place or where it is leading us, it is that part which is highly subjective. Especially that out of all tarot cards, this is where it depicts a situation which is one way or another going to be not so favorable, let's say bad or out of control, chaotic, unpredictable, maybe an upheaval for example, but that unpleasantry will over time turn into something totally else. So just as bad or unpleasant, let's say a moment of crisis, the situation it depicts was, it is going to turn into something really beneficial for the situations or the person's highest good. And of course there is another side to this, where a tower moment can sometimes come from within. And when it comes from within, it really depends on our own unconscious patterns, the divine from within, so to speak. And there are other times when it is actually triggered by karmic forces, by the external divine plan. And there are also situations when simply that tower moment or whatever the tower depicts isn't really our own, but because of circumstances, we might be collateral victims of someone else's tower moment or a general tower moment. A fine example for this is the year 2020, when basically the population of an entire planet was a collateral victim of a general tower moment. From certain angles, points of view, it is deeply personal because we form the collective. So the collective is formed by millions of individuals, and how we live through the collective tower moment as individuals, well, that is how we make it our own. But at the same time, it didn't have to be predominantly negative for everyone equally. Because, the tower is an unexpected, sudden, radical change, which for some people was an opportunity, a window of opening, a chance to grow, to evolve, to seize the potential of this situation. Like, for example, pharmaceutical companies, the production of masks, the production of different type of protection equipment, etc. Well, that part of the tower moment was something rather beneficial for those who could use that opportunity in a very constructive way. Or let's see a totally different side of this. Maybe there were certain people out there who got really tired and all they wanted is to spend much more time with their families, with their loved ones, children, etc. And basically they just didn't have the chance, the possibility to do this before 2020, before the events of 2020. And all of a sudden the tower collapsed, the divine lightning hit our society, our structures, our fundamentals, so to speak. And overnight almost, those individuals saw their dream come true, but maybe in a rather dark and twisted way. But still, the experience was offered to them. They could spend more time with their families and loved ones, and it was up to them if they focused on the panic and fear, or if they managed to detach emotionally from whatever was happening outside and just use this chance to live their dreams, to spend time with their families. So this example serves to prove that whenever a tower moment takes place in our lives, it doesn't necessarily have to be doom and gloom. It really depends on us, on how we use it, how we choose to live it and experience it, and what we do with the aftermath. Now, before we go even further, let's take a look at the numerology behind the Tower card, which is 1 + 6, 7. And the number 7 suggests that in all circumstances, the Tower moment serves as a massive change, an upgrade, an evolution, the next step, so to speak, the higher perspective of all things. But in order for us to be able to perceive it that way, well, we have to see the foundations of everything. Because if the tower is something that we built over time and we gave it stability, we gave it a certain kind of permanence, stability, grounding, the only way we can change that is if we can work with the foundations of the whole structure, and that does require deconstruction. Like, for example, when we have a building and it is serving its purpose, it is, let's say, very, very important, like a hospital, or like an important factory, or a school, for example. But that building is already really, really old, and it needs to be upgraded, it needs to be made even safer. In other words, it still needs to continue its existence over a long period of time, while the simplest solution is to deconstruct it, demolish it, and rebuild it. Rebuild it with newer technology, with safer materials, upgrade the electric installations, the sanitary installations, maybe a new and better design. So basically the building and the purpose it serves remains the same, but this was the only way the upgrade could take place. For the foundations, the very foundations of the old building became outdated or sometimes quite dangerous. You know, maybe the materials and the construction aged so much that repair wouldn't work anymore. Repair wouldn't offer the stability, safety, or the possibility of evolution. So just as the vibration of 7, it is a change, it is a drastical change, it is very quick paced, because the demolition is very quick. It can happen in an instant, for example. And also, it gives way to new possibilities, to new ideas, to new creations of our intellect, our intelligence to be implemented. So an idea is not just going to be born as an intellectual energy, but it's also going to be manifested. As in, for example, the construction, the physical part of the construction. But before that happens, first of all, the architecture, the scheme, the design needs to be put into place. And once it is accomplished, then is the moment when the old building is safe to be demolished, because its newer version already exists in thought. Now let's take a look at the astrological correspondent of the Tower card, which is also very suggestive. The Tower card corresponds to the planet Mars, especially the way it was interpreted by the ancients, where, as you probably know, the ancients considered Mars to be the lower malefic, malefic meaning that a planet, an energy, an astrological force, which creates conflicts, challenges, temptations. It stirs things up. And is in this sense, whenever Mars was in a rather unfavorable or stressed out position, that's how the ancients could predict a war, a calamity, a conflict, maybe a backstabbing, something which would change and shake things up quite radically. And even if we look at Mars as just an inner psychological energy, its shadow side, well, it is ego, it is very strong willpower, obsession, my way or the highway. It also symbolizes all of our primordial instincts, survival instincts, our urges, all of those energies which basically we cannot perfectly control because it is the animal inside of us. But we also have to consider the modern interpretation of Mars, which is basically, as I said, willpower, energy, focus, ambition, the willingness to work, the willingness to be immersed into something, the willingness to sacrifice, the willingness to invest time and energy. And, it is a choice because Saturn is the higher malefic, so Saturn demands all of this. But Mars, Mars has a choice. Either it can choose to do this, either it can choose to do the work, invest the time, all the sacrifices, the focus, the energy, etc. But it can also choose not to fulfill the requirements and take a different path. And of course, let us not forget that if Mars is the power, the astrological influence, which usually stirs up a tower moment, the same way it is also Mars which can prevent such a tower moment, save such a tower moment, or help with the reconstruction, because Mars is also passion, it is also ambition, it is courage, it is the willingness to sacrifice for another person, to be a hero, so to speak. And if the energy of Mars is combined with compassion and deep understanding, well, then there is no need for that tower moment to be extremely destructive. It may just give birth to the crisis, but with patience, diligence, and work, of course, we can fix it without big disasters, without this turning into a massive crisis. And of course, another side to this is that very many times that inner Mars, our instincts, our inner power, so to speak, is influenced by our unconscious patterns. So very many times we are influenced, almost seduced by these inner forces, by that inner Mars, to make a certain step, a certain choice, a certain decision, which will start this karmic cataclysm. And of course, the time when it happens, it will seem like a very unwise choice, or a big massive risk, or leap of faith which leads to a crisis. So it may seem that we have done something very silly, but only after time passes and the crisis, the nuance of urgency of whatever took place fades away, can we see the wisdom that it was basically just our inner clock ticking. It was basically our intuition guiding us to trigger something, even if that something was rather unpleasant at first. It was needed for us to evolve, to get out of our comfort zones, or very many times in life, it takes a crisis to awaken us, either spiritually, from a psychological perspective, to a greater truth, or to be able to see, the corrupted foundations of something in our lives, maybe a friendship, a relationship, a contract, an agreement, etc. So all these examples just serve to prove that even though the Tower card is usually associated with something chaotic, unpleasant, and potentially something that happens very, very quickly, many times it just can't be avoided, yet still there is no reason why to fear this card, because it will lead to freedom or a greater truth. It always serves our highest good. And in circumstances and situations when it doesn't, well, it can be a warning sign depicting a danger. So that already is a prophecy which attempts to prevent itself from being fulfilled. So it is always a good sign, because either your inner voice, your intuition, or the divine forces are trying to warn you not to do something or to be careful with something, etc. This is also one of those cards which many times doesn't have to be personal whatsoever. It can simply depict a natural calamity, a disaster, something which is totally outside our sphere of influence. And a very good example for this is a personal example. At the end of 2019, in December, or even going back to November, I think, the Tower card kept popping up in all of my readings, and I just couldn't understand what it was trying to tell me, because it didn't appear like a personal warning for me to be careful about something. Neither did it appear in a kind of combination with other cards where they would point to someone dear in my life going through a crisis or whatever. Yet still it appeared each and every time. It appeared with incredible frequency on a daily basis. And every time I try to clarify it, to ask what it means, what are you trying to tell me, usually the World card or the Wheel of Fortune kept clarifying it, and it wasn't clear to me whatsoever. But after a few months, I could clearly see that the World card was actually referring to the world and also the karmic forces. And even if the Tower card had nothing to do with me personally, well, it did influence my life, even if not in a physical way, but still, on social media, everywhere I looked, on the news, on the internet, or any conversation, well, it featured the coronavirus situation. So it did affect my life, and just like everyone else, it did produce really significant changes for me personally as well. And also the symbolism was so very accurate. Most tarot decks depict this card as a tower reaching to the skies, a tower constructed to serve as a temple, as a holy space, as a space meant to contain something divine, or basically it can be seen as the manifestation of the divine scheme. So the construction part, the building, or in some decks it is depicted as a tree, either way, it shows the work which was input into the building, the raising of the tower. It shows the time, the sacrifice, and each brick is a piece of the puzzle. Each brick shows a different stage of its construction, and of course then we have the divine lightning striking it, regardless if it's depicted as a tree or something else. The lightning, the force of nature, the divine wrath, the rage is there. It hits it, so bricks start to fall off, and in very many versions there are two collateral victims. Some depicted as acolytes who worked in the tower, others as priests who occupied the tower, others as the emperor who is basically cast out of its tower. In other versions, it is the high priest who loses his temple, and finally, some versions depict the lovers falling out of paradise. Newer versions of tarot decks or oracle cards many times don't depict the calamity, the disaster at all. But I do think that the original symbol used was the biblical Tower of Babel, where the intent was one very noble, it was knowledge. To reach the heavens, to be able to have an understanding of even the divine spheres, but when they went too far, so far so that the foundations, symbolically meaning the greater purpose of why this tower was constructed, as in for that knowledge to serve for everyone's greatest good, when the foundations were forgotten, well, the tower couldn't go any higher than that, because in an imperfect world, even our knowledge has to be somewhat imperfect, somewhat subjective, and limits and limitations do have their purpose and their role. So if we use our inner Mars, our willpower, our sovereignty, our free will to overcome our limitations, well, there is a certain kind of limit that we must not really overcome, because if we do overcome it, then everything changes, and we find ourselves that we are no longer the same person. Once we overcame the limit, we are someone totally different. Like, for example, when someone embarks on a journey of study and they work towards a degree, well, they usually get their specialization. But if they aim to overcome certain limits and get a PhD, for example, and they succeed, well, then naturally they will no longer work in the same position, in the same circumstances that just their basic studies would have offered them. The very fact that they obtained something much higher almost forces them to take on greater opportunities, use their potential to its maximum. So this is why when we wish to overcome certain limits, we need to accept the fact that perhaps by overcoming them, everything in our lives and even the self will go through an upgrade, an evolution, a profound change, so nothing will ever be the same again. So this is one of the warnings of the Tower card, to be very careful with our ambitions, with wherever we invest and place our focus and energy. Many times we might get much more than we bargained for. But this is also true in an opposite way, where if we need a really significant and profound change, where everything has to be totally different, well, then there is no other way than to basically navigate through a tower moment, deconstruct everything, or take a leap of faith which shatters our old normality, and then we have to reconstruct. Now in the following, let's take a look at what the Tower card can mean in different combinations. Well, on its own, it certainly is a warning sign that something unexpected is coming. It can be an upheaval, uprooting, sudden and unexpected change. Sometimes it can be something as simple as an information, as a communication, an epiphany, a sudden realization, which can change everything. While other times it can mean a karmic event, a divinely orchestrated event, or it can even mean the result of our own actions, something that we may have started some time ago, and only now does the repercussion return to us. But even in this case, it doesn't really have to mean something negative. It just means that things are gonna be different. For example, the Tower combined with like certain cards which speak about control, like the Emperor, like the High Priest, even the Empress, emotional control or emotional stability. The World card, which is the symbol of Saturn, that which holds our reality together. Well, in these cases, it might indicate that something happens which might cause us to feel that like we lost all control over our lives or that specific subject. It is no longer in our hands, or we can no longer prevent change or a different turn of events. But again, it doesn't have to mean anything negative or bad. It is just a change, a different direction. Combined, for example, with the Chariot card, or for example the Temperance card or the Strength card, it can be a warning sign for us to be very careful how much intensity, how much energy, how much force or strength we invest into, for example, our purpose or getting what we want. Because if we overdo it, well, the ambition or the hard work can simply detonate what we want to accomplish because it's too much force. Or we might get what we want way too prematurely, which leads to disappointment or the lack of the feeling of satisfaction, and that is a Tower moment in itself. Or it can invite us to ask the question, are we truly sure that that is what we want? Another combination, the Tower card with the Death card, for example. Now that speaks about a really powerful change and transformation, which does require us to eliminate certain things from our lives. May it be a relationship, friendships, something that we do as a routine. It can mean so very many different things. In more classic interpretations of the tarot, the Tower is actually seen as our home, our house, or the stability in our lives. And for example, if there is a very positive card combined with the Tower, well, it doesn't necessarily have to mean upheaval, it just means that it will take place in our house. Or whatever the reading specifies, it happens in our home or in familiar ground, whatever we hold as our temple, so to speak. For example, our physical body. And even if it means like some electrical equipment, for example, breaking, like washing machine, fridge or something, a household item, or like a broken pipe or some kind of damage to our home. Well, even though the damage itself is not something pleasant, it still leads to an upgrade. Very many times the Tower moment comes in a situation when we are quite comfortable, either financially or we have spare time, etc. So even if it represents like a loss or something breaking down, it's actually for our greatest good, because that item or the pipe or whatever it is would have need to be replaced soon anyway. So it comes as a divine, let's say, encouragement that the time is now to, make an upgrade or make a new purchase, do repairs around the house or do a massive cleaning, etc. So this unfavorable event just comes as a catalyst, something to trigger a really positive and beneficial outcome. Now, of course, there are times when the Tower does suggest its proper sense, like crisis, upheaval, something really, really unpleasant. For example, combined with the Five of Coins, it can mean imminent financial loss or illness. It can also represent an accident which affects your physical health. Combined with the Ten of Coins reversed, for example, it can mean a huge expense. Combined with the Five of Cups, for example, like a trauma, an emotional shock, Five of Wands, a conflict, a fight, even a physical fight. Combined with the Three of Swords, it can mean heartache or someone really hurting you emotionally, or a bad word, a harsh communication. With the Lovers, well, it can indicate that either a massive upheaval is coming in your personal life or in the life of your partner. Tower with the Three of Cups reversed, especially if you're in a relationship, or make it the Tower, the Devil, and the Three of Cups reversed. It can mean a third party situation, infidelity. The Tower and Justice, Tower and Five of Swords or Seven of Swords. It can mean like a legal battle. It can mean backstabbing, gossip, or certain documents, papers, or a contractual or legal situation not being okay at all. Maybe there is a misunderstanding, a hidden error. It doesn't really have to be bad-willed, it can just be a mistake, but it might warn you to double check the documents, the contracts, the legal situation. If you have any kind of court cases, call the lawyer. Like the Tower and the Ten of Swords, it can mean a rather dramatic purification, where that Ten of Swords might indicate an imminent defeat. It can be a goal, a dream, a purpose, something that is important for you, something that you're working on, or something that you're working to preserve. In this case, it can mean the necessity to just surrender it and move on, because, the universe works in mysterious ways, and sometimes a loss or an obstacle which simply cannot be overcome is for our greatest good, just that we cannot see it this way because we don't have divine way of understanding and seeing the world. Now the Tower in reverse position does have a totally different kind of meaning, because it means that the upheaval is there, the change is there, the karmic influences or the inner forces are definitely there, but it doesn't need a dramatic and a drastic deconstruction. It can be fixed, it can be, let's say, healed, it can be prevented from falling, or you can simply avoid something from turning into a Tower moment, into a crisis or upheaval. Like, let me just give you a very simple example. Let's say you have a toothache, but you had some ice cream, and you're not sure if there is actually something wrong with your tooth, or if it's just a sensitivity, and you might, even though it's ridiculous, you might ask the tarot, and the Tower reversed comes out. Let's say clarified by the High Priestess reversed. Well, it is an indication to go to the dentist anyway, because even if it's just a sensitivity, the dentist can help you. So the Tower is reversed. Don't wait for it to get worse or to turn into a crisis. Just take the effort and go and have it checked out. Or let's say you're facing a rather unpleasant situation where you just logically kind of know and feel that it is gonna turn into a Tower moment, and the Tower reverse pops up in your reading. Well, it tells you that it's not as bad as you think, or it's not gonna get as far to become a Tower moment. The situation, regardless of what it is, can be diffused, it can be pacified. Disaster or, a massive instability or a unfavorable evolution of things can be prevented. Or many times, for example, with the Two of Swords or with the Nine of Swords, it can tell you that it is just your fears. Or if it's like a premonition you have, it is all in your mind and it's not really anything more than that. But at the same time, the Tower is a very good example. If we fear something very, very strongly, if that fear becomes a rather powerful unconscious energy, then we can actually attract into our lives what we fear the most. So many times the Tower is an indication to be very, very careful. How much fear do we allow to be felt by us? Because fear can also turn into creational energy where we just attract chaos into our lives. Fear is basically only healthy when it just urges us to be more diligent, to be more aware, to be more precautious. But if we allow that to rule our lives, to constantly run in our minds, well, that is already unhealthy. And we kind of give a false information to the universe that is what we need to experience due to the intensity through which we're living something which is not yet created, or it doesn't exist yet. Especially when the Tower is combined with the Moon card, because the Moon can mean our inner creative energies, and if we fear something obsessively in a paranoid way, when we're just attracting it into our lives, or we are guiding ourselves in order to experience exactly that thing which we fear the most. But of course, like all tarot cards, especially the rather controversial ones, it depends the most our own relations and the way we personally see the Tower card. There are certain readers who don't attribute a negative meaning to it whatsoever, and it's absolutely fine because that is their way of seeing it and interpreting it, while there are other people who always see the Tower as something rather unpleasant. So it all depends on you, your philosophy, and your own experiences with the Tower card. Well, this concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time when we are going to take a look at one of the most optimistic and positive cards of the tarot, one of my very favorites, the Star card. Thank you again. Until next time, bye for now.